Matt Robison, Beyond Politics. And today, the question in Donald Trump's Washington that very few people are focused on, but that may be the most important of all. In the 3 weeks of Donald Trump's second term as president, the media and the public have mostly been focused on his raft of executive orders and the blitzkrieg attack that he's waged on federal agencies, and that's already gutted American foreign aid with tragic consequences. And we've talked a lot on the show about how a lot of this stuff doesn't rise anywhere close to the scale of impact he's had on USAID, not yet. And that's partly because there's only so much that a president can do under the law and the Constitution. A president does have vast powers, but under our Constitution, most of what our government does, certainly most of how we spend our taxpayer money, is controlled by Congress. And unless you're a sicko, we don't tend to pay a lot of attention to that. And there's good reason. Most people find it pretty dull. All of the maneuvering and negotiating and deal-making, that falls into the TL part of TLDR. There's a reason that in the Star Wars movies, every time Han Solo wants to make fun of Leia for not doing something fast enough, he accuses her of debating it in the committee. But it's still Congress that makes the biggest decisions that we ultimately care about. In just a few weeks, Donald Trump has done some bad things and frozen billions of dollars of spending. But Congress is making decisions right now that affect trillions of dollars with a T, your taxes, your Social Security, your health care. So that's a bit of a challenge for the media. Frankly, it's a bit of a challenge for me because I loved working in Congress and I find all of this fascinating, but I know most people don't. They want the bottom line. So that's why today I wanted to bring you a real bottom line conversation with one of the best explainers of the reality inside Congress that I know. Ryan McConaghy is a longtime friend and former colleague from our days together as congressional staffers. He served as Senator Chuck Schumer's right-hand man for policy and is now a partner doing public affairs for Forbes Tate. When he worked for Chuck Schumer, if you picture the diagram, the circles of policy analysis, legislation, media, public opinion, and working with interest groups, Ryan sat right in the center of all of those circles. And he's really great at giving us a window into what's happening inside Congress and how that affects the bottom line for all of us outside. And I wanted to know, what can Trump's Republican allies in Congress really get done? How far can they go? And what leverage do Democrats really have, to put some guardrails around it? So here we go with me and Ryan McConaghy. You are a Washington insider even longer than I've been. Because you continued to be a Washington insider after I went into a dormant phase like a cicada. What's the low-key mood? You work with Democrats. You are a Democrat. You work closely with Republicans. You are very hooked in. Are people experiencing shock and awe? Are the insiders genuinely shocked at the first few weeks of the Trump administration?
Yeah, I would say so. I think even for someone who's been here, I'm not going to say how long I've been here, but the turn of the century would be an applicable phrase. And we've been through a lot. We've been through foreign conflicts, other things. I think this is truly unprecedented. And the closest precedent to it is the last Trump administration. One way in which it is the same is that I do think some people forgot the pace of development and that it was like this every day for 4 years. It was except it was kind of an outrageous tweet or a crazy statement or some other kind of provocative action that was more kind of a media and communications thing. You're combining the speed of that and the deluge of that with actions that are having a really fundamental and in many ways unprecedented effect on government. And I think that the speed and the scale combined have people, certainly Democrats are having a lot of trouble grappling with it right now and trying to figure out what to do, given that they don't have any levers of power. I think even Republicans who are not in the White House and not in the administration, in many cases, are sort of taken aback and at least given pause privately by what they're seeing. And also just trying to keep up like everybody else, because this is an administration that is full bore in its own direction, and Republicans are largely trying to keep up while they figure out how to move this agenda through Congress.
I think that's ultimately where we want to go. I think from my perspective, now that I've kind of devolved to the media and analyst side, and you're still in it, you are very much hands in, working with former colleagues, working on bills, working for clients. It feels to me that it's gotten much harder. It's much harder than in the first Trump administration, because the first time around, it was a lot of tweets and it felt like a lot of nonsense. And ultimately, the rubber met the road exactly one time in the tax bill. I mean, there were other pieces of legislation that passed during the first Trump administration, but nothing that held a candle to the significance of that one. It was really his major legislative accomplishment. Everything else was a lot of performative nuttery. There were shutdowns, there were histrionics. This time, it feels to me like there's a but maybe element to a lot of what's going on. I've been kind of pleading with people on the show. Let's not exhaust our adrenal glands now, because there's way more to come and we're going to need the energy. It feels to me like if you've seen the M. Night Shyamalan film Signs, there's a scene where Joaquin Phoenix is talking to a military recruiter, and the military recruiter is super creepy. This is a well-known military tactic. It's called probing. You test the limits of your enemy. You kind of you infiltrate. You don't do any damage. You just find out what the limits are. That's what it feels like is happening. And right now we're seeing it on the legal front. We're seeing it on the executive order front. We're sort of testing the boundaries of how far can we push Congress? How far can we push our congressional allies? Where are the limits? But they haven't dropped the hammer yet. And so to me, it would feel like if I were in your shoes, there's just a huge cloud of uncertainty of how far will this go over the next few months.
I think that's right. And you're absolutely right. And I think this is where and we may go to this part in the later part of the discussion, is what Democrats do, but there's definitely within Congress, there is definitely a mindset developing that we have to be digging in for. This is going to be measured in weeks and months, not in days.
Yeah.
And we have to pace ourselves for the marathon. But your point, I don't even know if it's, and I love a good movie reference, I don't even know if it's probing, because I don't know that it's designed to find weaknesses. I think this is, and I say this as, and I think Democrats sometimes get hamstrung and overly analytical. I think the opposite is here. I don't think this administration necessarily needs to know the destination before it starts the journey. And it's just, we're off, we're
That's
running.
That's a good point.
And we're going to go as hard and fast as we can. And like when we hit a wall, we'll hit it, or maybe we won't.
Or maybe we won't. Exactly.
Right.
And so like this infiltration from this 25-year-old nutbag who was later revealed to be shocked that he was a vicious racist. And once that was revealed by the Wall Street Journal, he resigned. But anyway, this 25-year-old was part of Musk's army, gets embedded at the Treasury Department, accesses super sensitive government payment systems. And who knows what skullduggery will unfold from that. To me, that felt, this is Musk saying, let's just see what we can get away with here. It's creepy. It is genuinely creepy. But it also does feel like, I think the way you put it is right. It's sure, they're genuinely trying stuff, and it's not just to gain information. It's also because, look, it might work, right? It might work. They tried this whole fork in the road email, like, we hope the whole federal workforce will retire. And a judge said, oh, okay, hold on. We're not sure you can do that. But they're like, maybe it'll work. Let's try it. But I think the reason it all feels like a preliminary to me is that a lot of it touches hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars. But when you want to talk trillions of dollars, which is the way Washington thinks about real money, you still have to pass things through Congress. You still have to do that. And that's really right in your wheelhouse. And so just remind everyone right now what's under discussion. And full disclosure, we're recording this Friday afternoon, and this is a fast developing story. So we won't get caught on the fine-grained details that may change in the next few days. But what is the overall arc of what's going on here when it comes to reconciliation, debt limit, government shutdown, all of the issues that Republicans are desperately trying to figure out?
Yeah, and thank you for the timestamp, because you need it in this day and age.
Right.
I'll
give another one in 2 minutes.
I mean, most of the attention and most of the coverage, and quite frankly, most of what the Republican leadership is talking about is reconciliation, because, like you said, the signature achievement for Trump was the tax cut bill in 2017. They did that through reconciliation. Reconciliation is how they plan to move most of their agenda.
And reconciliation, just to remind people, is your one shot. Well, it is your shot to use a special procedure in the Senate. If it's tied to the budget, if there's a nexus to the budget, you can pass a bill with a simple majority. You can't filibuster it.
That's correct. And so there's disagreement between Republicans over, do they do one bill where they do the tax cuts and immigration things and energy things they want to do? Do they do two bills? Because their margins, particularly in the House, are incredibly small. And the reality is, to make this math work without engaging in just some flat out, very flagrant kind of funny math, which we can also talk about, they are going to need to find trillions of dollars in offsets. And it is hard to do that without going into education, without going into healthcare, without going into Medicaid. These things are very much on the table.
Things that Americans really care about.
And they know that these things are incredibly unpopular to go after. So it is a bind they are in. And that is really where, with the funding freeze, that's a place where the public cried out, because they said, wait a minute, you're not school lunches thing. When you had cities and states saying, I can't get into access housing money because the payment portals are closed, it actually touches people's lives.
And they begin to get,
that's the test. And
pretty unhappy. It's like, it all sounds good. It all sounds good.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to cut foreign aid. This is my newest piece in Newsweek. It's, oh yeah, we're going to cut foreign aid. Tons of waste there. All sounds pretty good to Republican voters until you hear, wait a second, like we're making thousands of people starve. Like that doesn't sound very American of us. That doesn't sound very Christian of us. It all sounds well and good. It's like, yeah, we're cutting down the waste and the fraud in government, until it's, yeah, but you might not get your Social Security check, and your veterans benefits might be an issue. And if you have a vet's hospital appointment scheduled, not so sure that's going to happen. It's all well and good until you start messing with the many things that the government does that people actually really care about.
Yeah, I mean, right now they're largely touching things people can see, maybe they hear. But when you get into education, healthcare, housing, and by the way, costs are still up, eggs are still expensive, that's where you get into things people feel. And that may be where you sort of hit that wall. But Matt, I'm talking about reconciliation, like Republican leadership. Before reconciliation, we actually have a funding deadline coming up.
Oh, yes. Yes. No, explain, because this gets confusing even to former insiders like me. There's two things, right? There's funding, like funding for the government, and there's also the debt ceiling. Which one are you focused on?
I'm focused on the annual funding because that comes up first, and that's the thing that has to happen. There's going to be a forcing mechanism there. Right now, the government is only funded until March 18th. And after that, unless there is some resolution, which there's not a lot of negotiating happening on that, because most of the attention is on the reconciliation and delivering the Trump tax cuts extension and other things on the Trump agenda that Republicans want to do. But it's more than housekeeping, but it's not the main mover of the agenda. So there's been less progress made, but the time is running out on that.
Why is it so hard for Republicans? I mean, they have a majority in the House and the Senate, and they have the presidency. All you got to do is continue funding. Why is that so hard?
Because you say they have a majority, their majority is literally a count on one hand majority in the House, which is, as you and I met as House people back in the day, and the House is an unruly beast, even with 20-seat majorities, let alone 5. And you have differences of opinion among Republicans about how long the spending should be, whether it should move as one bill or several bills, whether we should increase spending, whether we should cut it. And it's like a game of Jenga, particularly for Speaker Johnson, to try. You move one piece to satisfy one group, and then suddenly another piece goes. It's very tough to get that Jenga tower high enough to go over to the Senate. And in the Senate, you don't have that special procedure reconciliation you were talking about. So you need Democratic buy-in, and Democrats are going to come in here seeing what's happening in the administration. I mean, one of the key dynamics here is, if you're a Democrat, how can you trust a spending deal that you cut with Republicans right now if that money is just going to go over to Russ Vought, and he has basically said, I can impound what I want? It's sort of it's a deal on paper if the administration is not going to execute it. So Democrats are going to need assurances that the money that they cut a deal on with Republicans actually goes where Congress says it's going to go, and doesn't just go into some sort of federal black hole over at OMB. So it's tricky.
This is a big issue, the amount of leverage that Democrats have. I want to make sure to nail that point, but let's, just so that we don't leave it hanging. Yeah. There is also the debt ceiling, which is separate, right? There's a limit. There shouldn't be. It's kind of stupid, but there is a statutory limit on how much debt the U.S. can issue, and we're going to bump up against it somewhat soon. What's the deal with that currently? Because it's a separate issue. It may get folded into the reconciliation bill. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so we have technically hit the debt limit, or we're close to it, and moved into what they call extraordinary measures, which are, I guess, getting less extraordinary by the day. But it's basically if the federal government hits its credit limit, and then you have a separate line of credit you can use to float until you figure out a way to get more credit. Um, but if we get to a point where we max all that out in the summer, that's where then the government moves to a cash accounting basis, which is literally the amount of money the government takes in each day is the amount it can pay out. That's not enough to cover expenses, and that's everything: Medicaid, Social Security, education, debt service. You would see a massive impact immediately on the economy in terms of increased interest rates, stock market, retirement accounts. It'd be an economic catastrophe. But Republicans have tended to not want to raise that without concessions. I think that Democrats have typically favored kind of protecting the economy. I'm not sure that those rules necessarily apply in this environment. Um, so Republicans may choose to try and fold that into a reconciliation bill just to get it out of the way and
Just
take power into
swallow
their
it.
own hands.
Yeah.
But again, with that tight House margin, they may not be able to.
Hmm.
But by most accounts, and again, this really depends on the economy, so it's a little bit unpredictable. But right now, the latest predictions are that those extraordinary measures kind of get us into the summer. That you're probably not going to see that come up in the context of the March 15th funding.
Got it. So okay. First of all, I just have to say that Extraordinary Measures would make a great title for a very unsuccessful action thriller starring Ryan Gosling and Zendaya, right? It would be like, at a time where Washington is paralyzed. Extraordinary Measures. Anyway, no one would go to see that. It's like when the judge released Trump on unconditional discharge, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Let's get to the main issue here. Democratic leverage. Because there's been a growing buzz in the media about, like, where are the Democrats? The New York Times, the daily podcast, literally named an episode this past week. Where are the Democrats? What are the Democrats doing? It seems like our default mode is we can organize a press conference in front of the Capitol, kind of like the backdrop you have behind you. That's something. It's not nothing, but it's not stopping any of the Trump stuff. But it does sound like they have leverage. Where are their points of leverage, and how much of it is there?
Yeah, so I think one of the frustrations with sort of Democrats across the country and online is, why aren't you stopping this right now? So where are the hearings? They want to see action. They want to see it now. The challenge is Democrats don't control anything. They don't control the levers of powers in the committee. They can't hold hearings. They can send oversight letters, and they're doing that. So I think you'll see, to the extent that they can work with Republicans to engage in bipartisan oversight, they'll do that. But really, we're coming into the point where the Senate has only been doing nominations. They don't need Democratic votes for that. This funding deadline is the first time they're really going to need Democratic votes for something that's important.
And they definitely will.
Yes, they definitely, you need 60 votes for that. And so this is a point where, again, if you're a Democrat, you're saying, okay, usually these fights boil down to how much money we're going to spend, how much we're going to spend on defense, non-defense. There are bigger issues here now. And fundamentally, like I said, if you're a Democrat, one of the things you need to know is, if I cut a deal, that the majority and the executive branch are going to live by this deal, and not just take their money and leave ours on the table. So I think it is. And again, these are priorities. When we talk about federal funding, these are things that people feel. These are things that are everything from small business support to schools to farm support so it's infrastructure spending. So this is a place where Democrats can have a series of clear conditions that directly speak to things that people will feel and that are popular, and they have the ability to unify and stick together as a rally point and hold the line in a way that they haven't had to date. They've been going and doing press conferences. They've been trying to get into government buildings. Those things are sort of necessary but not sufficient. But they are also kind of the limit of what they can do in Congress, while other groups and third-party groups that have standing and people who are actually harmed by these policies go through the courts. So there's the outside game through the courts, there's the media game, and then now in this funding fight is the time where Democrats will actually have a chance to kind of flex some of their legislative muscle.
All right, I want to do a little thought exercise with you, because as you're saying this, the question that's burning is like, oh, this sounds kind of good, but how much leverage do Democrats really have? So, not to be flip about what's literally a life and death matter, but I want to turn it into a little bit of a game. All right. And we're going to do some role playing here. And I'm going to give you the chance. Oh, I think I'll let you be the Democrats. Why don't I be, who's going to lead? Is it Vought? Who's going to lead negotiations for the Republicans? Probably Russell Vought, right?
From the executive. I mean, it'll be Stewart, it'll be Johnson, ultimately with the White
I'll
House.
be,
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
I'll be Vought. You be Chuck. You be your old boss. All right. But you don't have to do the accent. All right. Okay.
By the way, I've heard you and Hodes. You're Chuck. I'm throwing some flags on the impression for you.
It's not great. The only thing they have in common is probably like six generations ago, they probably were cousins. Like it's all Eastern European Jewish stock somewhere back there. But all right, here we go. You're Schumer. I'm Vought. We're going to have a negotiation. I say, yo, give me your votes so that we don't have a government shutdown. What do you say?
I say we need it in writing that when we cut a deal on this money, that this money is going to go where Congress says it's going to the American people, and that it doesn't just stop at your desk.
Okay, how about this? Screw you. I don't care if we shut down the government. When we shut down the government, we've shut down all the programs that my buddy Elon's trying to shut down anyway. You're doing his dirty work for him. Please shut down the government. I'm begging you. I'm going to blame you, by the way, Chuck.
I'm sure we'll try and blame each other. But while you're blaming me for government programs shutting down, I'll be blaming you for economic uncertainty that's tanking the stock market. I'll be blaming you for all the voters who aren't getting programs that they need to support their communities, that aren't getting their infrastructure projects funded, that aren't getting their clean water protected. Did you know that if we cut off this funding, that that food inspectors don't get paid and you're going to compromise the ability to have a safe food supply? Is that something that you think the American people sent you to Washington for?
Damn it, Chuck. You're a cagey negotiator. All right. That sounded pretty good coming out of your mouth. I see this isn't your first rodeo. But how far does it go? I mean, how much power do Democrats really have here? Because right behind the budget deal, there's the reconciliation piece. And look, latest reporting again, I told you I'd timestamp again. So we're at 4:31 p.m. on Friday afternoon. The latest reporting on this is you're talking about a package ultimately of tax cuts, of energy policies, $150 billion for the border, all kinds of things that Democrats may or may not be on board with. You're talking about a total spending or deficit increase package, I should say, because it could include tax cuts, of $5 trillion to $12 trillion. So if Democrats are going to do this exercise that you and I just did, do they have to use is this their only shot at leverage? How else can they affect what's going to happen in reconciliation?
I mean, I think what they're going to have to do in reconciliation, what I think you will do is, we'll see is they're going to make Republicans vote on the exact consequences of what's in this bill. They're going to focus it on they're going to create a lot of either ors through the amendments, because the flip side of reconciliation is one party could pass it if they have 50 votes. But from a staff perspective, the very painful process of vote-a-rama, which is basically
vote-a-rama
free for all.
Okay.
Yes, where they go all
night. It sounds like something that would have been said in Fast Times at Ridgemont High if Spicoli was like a little bit more stoned. Can you just explain to people, this is deep in the weeds, just explain the vote-a-rama?
Yeah. The long story short is that typically the amendment process is very structured. There are very specific rules about what amendments can come up and what can't. Vote-a-rama is a much more free-flowing, people can put an almost unlimited number of amendments. Basically, it's a vote till you drop process where you can have dozens and dozens of votes back to back. And so Democrats will structure a lot of amendments to say, why don't we, instead of cutting the top tax rate, why don't we take the money in this bill and why don't we spend it on building a new bridge in every state in the country, or public school infrastructure? Why don't we spend it on building rural hospitals? They're going to create that contrast with what this money could be going for. Or why don't we do it, for example, to pay for a very popular childcare tax credit to help families deal with the high cost of paying for kids? There are a lot of popular economic agenda items on the Democratic agenda, and that amendment process is going to give them a chance to compare and contrast what Republicans are doing, which is tax cuts for high income earners, corporations, that kind of thing. It'll be framed as these special interests versus this is the bill that you could have, and which one is actually going to be better for you.
And all of that.
And so again, that is a shaming exercise. If Republicans can hold their votes together, they will be able to do this, but that'll be the process they have to go through to get there.
It's going to be a very interesting moral experiment to see, do Republicans still have a capacity to feel shame? That's me saying it, not you. I know you have good Republican colleagues that I'm not impugning. But, and this, okay, just quick read back. So reconciliation is tough for the party out of the majority because it is the shot for the majority to, without the filibuster, to just majority rules, cramp something through.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes with a votorama. So there's a struggle session, and it's aimed straight at Tom Tillis, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. It's aimed at the senators who are up in 2026 who are going to have tough races.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the way these budget processes always go. In some ways, it's really a gift to the campaign consultants because it's like it's an attack ad factory with all these votes.
The polling firms they get to test. It's okay. We have 15 amendments that you voted against in the votorama. Let's just beta test and see what voters respond to. So that's one point of leverage in this big reconciliation bill that's coming at Democrats that implements a lot of the Trump agenda. I'd say the majority of the Trump agenda is going through the reconciliation bill. Is there any other leverage? Can Democrats tie together, for example, this funding the government vote or the eventual debt ceiling piece of this? Is there any way that they can extract some leverage out of that to affect the reconciliation bill?
I mean, you never say never, and I don't know exactly kind of what discussions are going on in closed doors that could potentially link like a future debt limit bill to a reconciliation bill if Republicans don't put it in reconciliation. But the timing on those things doesn't really sync up unless Republicans, which there's a very real chance Republicans won't get to the reconciliation until we're right up against it with the debt limit. Typically, when those things happen and there's sort of a joined leverage, there's also a synchronicity. It's tough to do that if there's months between one vote to the other vote. I think watch whether Republicans are going to try in the Senate. Republicans in the Senate have grown impatient with Republicans in the House. They are going to try and mark up a budget resolution next week, and the House isn't ready. We're already off to the races with House Senate, but it took Democrats a long time to get from a resolution to reconciliation to the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, there were multiple near-death experiences.
I remember how painful that was. That was bad. We talked about this.
And that was reconciliation. And so it's the same process and even narrower margin for Republicans. So this could be a long road, and you could see these processes sync up. But if Republicans are going to do reconciliation before this summer, the timing won't quite be right to create joint leverage there.
Is it a factor that there are going to be special elections in April that will bring two more Republican members into the House? Does that affect the timing of things?
Potentially. I mean, I think that takes them. That's still a count on one hand majority. I mean, that's a missed connecting flight away from not having the votes on the floor on a Monday or Tuesday night.
Right.
So, I mean, look, they're in a situation where every vote counts. So incrementally it helps, sure, but it only very slightly lessens the degree of difficulty.
And in terms of those differences that are so hard to iron out, I mean, it's an old Washington saw that your opposition may be the other party. Your enemy is the other chamber. And nowhere is that more true than when you own both chambers. So the Republicans, they have some issues, and you are seeing it play out in this one bill versus two bills thing. Again, don't want to necessarily get caught on too many weeds because it's been 7 minutes since our last timestamp, and who knows? Things may have been happened while we're tied up talking here, but where do you think this is going? Or maybe even, do you want to talk about like the merits and demerits of the one bill versus the two bill? Like, why are they stuck on this? It seems like the kind of thing that you should be able to figure out pretty quickly, right?
I think and I'm being asked to sort of project into the Republican caucus here a little bit, so I'll do my best. I know you have some other guests on who might be able to give you a different read, but I think the issue at play here is Republicans ultimately want to use the reconciliation process to do three things. The big thing is the economic thing, the tax cuts, or making permanent the Trump tax cuts from 2017. But they also want to do immigration and sort of their energy dominance agenda, which is more federal land open for oil and gas and more energy exploration. The latter two of those things are very popular, and the math can be accomplished somewhat easily compared to the tax part, which is very complicated and the math is very hard. you have Republicans in the House going with the one bill, and that's really the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee specifically saying, "A, we have to do one bill because if we do the immigration bill and the energy piece, and then we're just left with a standalone tax piece, that is gonna we're basically eating our dessert first." Whereas I think the Senate approach is, why don't we just eat our dessert now and then we'll work out the main course down the road? So you have the Republicans who want one bill are afraid tax will really be damaged and even that much harder than it's already going to be if you don't have the sweeteners of the immigration and energy pieces in. So that's the crux of the discrepancy or the disagreement.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. And it is genuinely hard because you could see how if you had, I can see, and I have such a House mindset. You've worked both chambers. I was a House guy for my entire career. So I think about it from that standpoint. And to me, it does make sense that if you have a giant MAGA chelada, that's not MAGA enchilada, by the way. If you have a MAGA chelada, you ultimately, those House members, they can't stand on their own. They can't vote against it. Those Freedom Caucus people want all the massive tax stuff. Or maybe the tax stuff is what's harder, but they definitely want the border stuff. They definitely want the energy stuff. You're going to swallow. It may be the only way that you get that through. All right. Now we're going to ruin your career because I'm going to ask you to make predictions that you can't possibly make and that could make you seem wrong. And you're in the business of knowing what the future holds. Let's do this. Let's set fire to your career. Where do you think this lands? Are they going to pass? This is the fun version. We're not holding to this. No one's listening.
Yeah.
One bill or two?
I think that they will ultimately have to at least try and fail on one before they move on to two. As demonstrating failure to sort of talk to the parts of your caucus that need to see you can't get something done is a tried and true tactic. And I think ultimately
Kevin McCarthy noticed that one.
I think, and I'm way out over my knowledge base here. But I mean, the House and the Senate do have to agree on the same bill, and so the Senate could go forward with a two bill strategy, and the House could just say, "That's nice, but here's our one bill. That's what we're going to send over to you."
So they could jam them. Basically, this is what we can do. This is what it is.
And the other thing I will say is that, again, this is a top-down governing infrastructure now that starts with Trump. And right now, Trump is a one bill guy. And he's the tiebreaker here, and he's the director. If he suddenly changes, that will change. But if Trump says one bill with Republicans in charge, bet on one bill.
Do Democrats ultimately get from our little play acting exercise the assurances they need that will allow a government funding deal to be made?
I think they are going to have to fight a daily fight about this. I remember and this is again during previous shutdowns, every day there's going to be a messaging effort to highlight specific harms, whether it's national parks, whether it's small businesses that can't get loans, and they're going to have to be energetic and have that breakthrough. The outcome of this, look, I think this is the strongest hand that Democrats will get. I think it's a good hand. I think it's a hand they can explain. I think it's a hand that they have explained in the past. Like when this funding fight specifically has come up, this is something Democrats know how to do because the American people are largely with them in what they're arguing. But it's going to be an actual fight, and they're going to have to win. And there's usually a little bit of dissatisfaction on both sides. So I would rather go into this being the Democrats than the Republicans, but it's going to be a live fight.
That is the most upbeat thing I've heard all day. And you know what? I had more questions for you, but I'm not going to step on it. I'm not going to step on the happiness. The hopium feels great. I want more hits of that. Always leave people wanting more. I'd rather be the Democrats in this than the Republicans. Oh, chef's kiss. I'm going to get you out. Ryan, thank you so much.
I do what I can. What I can. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.